it's Felisa, and today is going to be an entry into Spotlight Sunday, where I highlight cases of the missing, lost, and endangered, particularly those stories of African American women. Today's story is going to be on Ebony Giddens, and I'm taking it from a couple of different sources. I actually pieced a lot of this information together um, because there was some not conflicting reports, but differing accounts, and I wanted to make sure that I was giving as much information as I possibly could in order to try and bring Ebony home. The information that I'm going to be reporting on initially is taken from charlieproject.org. If you visit that site and you find the information useful, if you have the ability, I encourage you to please consider a donation to the administrator of that site. Her name is Megan, and she has done an incredible job with both organizing and presenting the information of these people who have gone missing across the country. Having said that, again, this case is on Ebony Giddens. She has been missing since March 11th, 2018 from Columbus, Georgia. Her classification is considered endangered. Her date of birth is given as December 23rd, 1990. She was 27 when she went missing. She is 4 feet 9 inches, 110 pounds. She is described as an African American female, black hair, brown eyes, and she had braids at the time of her disappearance. Her ears are pierced. Ebony was last seen in Columbus, Georgia on March 11th, 2018, and at the time she lived with two of her three sons, and they were aged 5 and 2. She resided in an apartment, and on the morning of March 12th, her brother came to pick the children up for school. Apparently, this was their normal routine. When he arrived at the house, he knocked. Ebony did not answer. She didn't answer the phone. She didn't respond to her text messages, and all of the calls were going directly to voicemail. Her brother became concerned, reached out to the father of her children, and together they went to the apartment, knocked some more, called some more, and eventually her 5-year-old answered the door and said that his mother was gone. They went into the apartment, searched the house, was unable to find Ebony, of course, and did note that her purse, her wallet, and her keys were in the living room, but her cell phone was missing. The brother and the father decided they need to call the police, so they called the police. They report her missing, and it is then that they discover that the last known person to have even spoken to her was a relative that spoke to her at about 11 p.m. the night before. The relative reported that the conversation was normal. The father also said that he had spoken to her. He must have spoken to her earlier in the day because the relative, and they didn't say who the relative was, but the family member or relative was the last known person to speak to her. But no one said that anything was wrong with Ebony. She seemed to be fine. So the next day rolls around. Brother shows up at the house, and this is when they discover that something is off, something is really wrong. Apparently, the week before she disappeared, she got into a domestic dispute with her then boyfriend named Malcolm Jackson. She called the police, and she said that he'd hit her in the face and threatened her with a gun. He was arrested on March 10th for misdemeanor assault. He bailed out of jail that same day. He continued to call her, and even though she told them that the relationship was over, he continued to blow her phone up. Neighbors did report seeing him working on the car the day before she was last seen. So if she was last seen on the 11th, he would have been working on that car on the 10th, which was the same day that he got arrested. And perhaps while he was working on this car, while he was on the premises, they got into it, and whatever happened, it caused him to be arrested for getting into a physical altercation with her. At any rate, the day after her disappearance, he was arrested again on charges of aggravated stalking and felony probation violation. So I'm assuming that whatever charges were levied against him on the 10th, the police, I guess, decided to formally charge him or bring him back in, or I'm not really clear on what caused him to be picked up again or why he was arrested again and jailed, but he was. So he was arrested on the 10th. He was out that same day. Ebony went missing on the 11th, assuming that she didn't go missing until the evening because the relative did speak to her at 11 o'clock. So um, she didn't go missing until that evening. And then Malcolm was picked up on the 12th. And I should be very careful to note that although at the time of her disappearance, he wasn't ever considered a suspect, it still was the opinion of her family that something was amiss and something had happened to her, because she certainly would not just go off and leave her children. Which, I'm going to just pause here and kind of walk through that timeline, because initially when I read it, I had to read it a couple of times and I had to pull up a couple of articles because something was just off. Like, it just did not make sense to me. So, I think that there was some time loss, obviously. There is no accounting of her movements from 11 o'clock that night till the morning when her brother would have picked the children up for school, or would have come by to pick the children up for school. I'm going to assume that school starts around 8 o'clock, so he probably got there. So there was a window of about 9 hours that nobody knows what happened or how it happened. She just simply vanished. Now, it's very telling that her purse, her wallet, and her keys were all found in the house, and her cell phone was gone. So, the cell phone is the thing that's really throwing me off, because as a woman, when you leave the house, if you think that you're going to be gone for any length of time, you're going to take at least your wallet because your ID is in there, you need some cash, and you take your cell phone. To take your cell phone only, but to leave sleeping children in the house says, that if she stepped out, she didn't intend to be gone long. But that also seems very out of character for her to actually leave the house and leave her children sleeping inside. Furthermore, her keys were in the house. So how did the front door lock? Because the little boy had to come and open up the door for the uncle and the dad, remember? So the door would have had to be locked, because I would think that if I were looking for my missing loved one, or my loved one is, at that time, she wasn't considered missing. They just were kind of worried about her because she hadn't been answering. So if I went over to my mother's house or whomever, after not being able to get in touch with her, and I'm knocking on the door and she's not answering the phone, the next thing I'm going to do is try the door, see if it's open. So I'm just going to go out on a limb and think that the dad and the brother tried to open up the door and it didn't open, which is why the baby had to come and open the door for them. So if you left the house, how did the door lock? How would the front door lock if her keys were still in the house? Like, that's what's really throwing me off. And if you're a mother and you leave the house, if your children are on the inside, you're gonna lock the door, which means that you're gonna have the key. The only plausible answer for me is two things. A couple of things. Number one, if the door automatically locks itself, which, let me just throw that out. I'm not going with that one really, because it could be, but why would you leave the house, close the door, knowing that you don't have your keys and your children are on the inside? And who else is going to be able to get into your house? Like, that doesn't make sense. She had her cell phone, and if she actually locked herself out the house, I'm sure that she would call somebody and be like, hey, I locked myself out the house. I need to get in. The kids are in there, etc. But she didn't do that. And so that, to me, doesn't ring authentic. So the next thing would be she left the house with someone who had a key and they locked the door. Or she walked out the front door thinking that she wasn't going to be gone long, and she didn't grab her keys and she just thought she was going to step out, maybe take a phone call, and something happened. But then again, it doesn't explain how the door got locked. So we're back to she was with someone who actually had the key and locked the door behind them, which that's just weird in and of itself. But okay, let's go with that. So she doesn't have any of her identification. She doesn't have her keys. I'm going to assume that she maybe doesn't have a vehicle since her brother was coming to pick up the kids. So where would she get on foot? How far could she get on foot? And did she get in the vehicle with someone? I would really like to know, after she spoke with her family member, did she receive any more calls, or did she make any calls after that? The cell phone companies would very easily be able to tell the police whether a call was answered, whether it was missed. Maybe if there were some incoming text messages, would she have been expecting someone that evening to come and pick her up? And if she did, then what happened and how did it happen? So, the best plausible guess is that this boyfriend had something to do with it, especially since he kept calling her and coming by, and it was alleged that they got into a physical altercation and he was actually arrested for that. And I read in another article that he actually was sentenced for some of those crimes, and I've forgotten how long he's gotten, but he was never truly charged with Ebony's disappearance. Then there is a whole other monkey wrench that I read in an article. I didn't see it in any of the other articles, but because it is listed in one document that I read, it's worth noting that she was allegedly pregnant at the time that she went missing. Now, an aunt of Malcolm said that she had gone over to the house because Ebony and Malcolm had gotten into it, and Ebony was putting him out. And so he was moving, and this aunt had gone over to the house to help, allegedly. And while she was there, Ebony pulled her to the side and shared that she was expecting. So, the aunt's contention was that if Ebony is still out there somewhere, then she has a baby. I don't know, but I'm including it because, like I said, it was part of an article that I read. I'm going to say allegedly because this aunt is the only person that has said that to now. At least that's the only place that I've seen it. I haven't seen any of Ebony's family actually come out and say that. But if that's the case, then that really does throw an additional level and layer of complexity and distress onto this story because, being missing is one thing, being pregnant and missing, so you're out there with a whole pregnancy, is another level of concern. I will say this, that for all intents and purposes, Ebony just feels as though she vanished into thin air. We all know that that's not true, but it feels that way because there's no accounting of her movements. I would have loved to have been able to see if her son mentioned anything. Did he hear anything? Did he see anything? Did anyone come to the house? I mean, it would have been pretty late, so he may have, been asleep. But kids are good for getting up in the middle of the night. Did he get up and, maybe go potty and saw something, or did he hear something that struck him as odd? Was she even there? Could he recall that Ebony put him to sleep or tucked him in or something like that? That would at least establish firmly that she was in the house at some point and that she left, obviously, and maybe create a small timeline. He wouldn't have been able to tell time, but was he up, and was he afraid to answer the door because he could have just been in there and known that his mother was gone and just didn't know what to do? But I understand the hesitancy of asking a child a whole bunch of questions that could further traumatize them. So I'm sure that they got as much information from him as possible. I hope that they got information from the cell phone if that was available. And I really hope that whatever happened in this case will come to light and there'll be some more and additional evidence that the police will be able to use to put this to bed and put this to rest. If you have any information about the disappearance of Ebony Giddens, please call the Columbus Police Department. I will leave the information below and it should be on the screen for you now. My heart goes out to her family and to her children, and I certainly hope that at some point information is presented that will bring Ebony home. Talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.